everyone. Today I have a very special guest. This is Professor Einstein, a former TV marketing executive turned marketing critic and professor of media studies. And yes, she is related to that Einstein distantly, in case you're wondering. She is the author of the book Hoodwinked, which I've been reading here on my Kindle, if you can see that. I really recommend this book for you to get more insight because the topics that we're discussing today requires a lot of nuance and depth. I recommend everyone to go and read the book if you're interested after seeing today's interview. Professor Einstein, thank you so much for coming and taking the busy time in your schedule to come and sit with us and discuss some of the topics. I particularly wanted to talk to you about what you call the anxiety economy.
Mm-hmm.
We have the attention economy, which everyone understands, social media and the attention, and then the anxiety economy. And you talk about in the book Hoodwinked how marketing and cults are very similar. And so if we can tie that to what's happening in the political atmosphere right now, I think a lot of people are very anxious. We're seeing a lot of crash outs, as we call it.
Yeah.
We can add some value to people who are going through so much right now. It would be really, really appreciative, especially coming from such an intellectual and an expert perspective. There's so much noise on social media with everybody putting themselves out there, trying to influence people. I think this is such a special opportunity for all of us. So thank you for being here.
That's so kind of you. It is really my pleasure. I'm so excited about this book because really it's been, it took me 3 years to write, but it's really 30 years worth of work. It is everything that I am as a marketer and what I know from understanding the intersection between religion and marketing, and particularly what we're seeing now in terms of cults. And this ties into the issue of digital media and how much time we spend on social media and how that begins to make us feel anxious, ultimately leads us to fear, ultimately creates us to be in a position where we're incredibly vulnerable and therefore open to people who will come in and say they have the answer to all of life's problems. So let me unpack all of that because there's a lot in there. So as you said, what economists have said is that we live in an attention economy. And I've always felt that that is too soft a way to describe it. Because to get somebody's attention is just to bang on the door, you can get somebody's attention. That's not what they want. They want us anxious, so we're glued to the media that we are engaging with. And so when you have, you have your phone in your hand, and what makes this really interesting in terms of the influencers, you literally have that person in the palm of your hand. And so the relationship feels very different than when we used to watch television where the screen was across the room in our living room. So the person doesn't feel quite so close. But when you have the phone in your hand, you feel like you have a relationship with that person. You feel like you know that person, and that person perhaps knows you. And so what is built into the technology and the incentives that are given to that person you have in your hand are both driven around the idea of increasing rage, because the more rage we know, the more rage in the content, the more likely that the influencer will get more views. So they're incentivized to create that angry kind of content. And at the same point, you have the technology that is created for us to stay connected to it. Now, I'm sure that people have heard all about dopamine by this point, and they may have also heard about the idea of intermittent rewards. And the idea of intermittent rewards works the same way that a Las Vegas slot machine works, which is that if we pulled the lever every time and we got a reward every time, you wouldn't keep playing the slots. But if you're not sure when that reward is going to happen, you are going to play more. And so that's what happens in the social media space, is that if we don't know, if we post something, if somebody's a content creator, you go back in and say, oh, did people like what I posted? Now, you may not realize that the social media platform is holding back some of those likes, and they will feed them, they will dump them at particular times in order that you will suddenly, oh, wow, this is taking off, great. And then you'll keep coming back again and again. But what happens to the viewer, what happens to the person, the visitor to the site, is that anxiety, right, is intended for us to stay connected to our technology, that we become increasingly anxious. We then need to want to release that anxiety because that's the obvious thing that people want to do. And you can do that through doom scrolling, which means you spend even more time on the technology.
Yes.
And the alternative becomes to buy something. And remember, all of this is so they can put more advertising in front of us. That's the bottom line on all of this. The problem, and to your point about the politics and what is going on right now, is that as we become anxious, as our emotions are played by the technology and by the influencers, and I'm not saying all, so let's put that out there, but the people that are out there that are ginning up our emotions for their own pocketbooks, combined with the technology, leaves us vulnerable because we're rushing, we're not thinking rationally. And this ties into Daniel Kahneman's work, the idea of thinking fast and slow. And so what the technology wants from us is for us to think fast. Because if you're thinking slowly, you're thinking rationally, you're thinking, maybe what this person's saying isn't true. Maybe I need to research what this person is saying. But rather, it wants to get us to tap into anxiety that will get us to push a button, whether it's continuing to scroll or getting us to buy something.
Right. So how can we become more mindful of these emotional triggers and start to engage with political issues in a way that fosters understanding rather than fear?
A couple of things. One is, I think people need to be conscious of going on to social media spaces when they're tired, when it's like you want a break, so you go to your phone. It'd be a good thing to break that habit. I recommend the book, The Power of Habit. People talk about the book, The Atomic Habits, which I think is just a ripoff of The Power of Habit, right? It is to, instead of picking up your phone, walk away from your desk. Walk away from your desk, go get a cup of tea, go take a walk around the block. That's what we used to do, right? Go take a walk around the block, go get some fresh air. Because when you are tired, when you are needing a break, when you aren't thinking, is when you become more vulnerable to these technologies and these kinds of workings of the anxiety economy. The other thing is, and I know this isn't easy to do, but to not just stay in your own bubble all the time. You don't necessarily have to engage with other people. Try if you want to, but take a look at what other folks are looking at. Or if that's too rough for you, follow other people who follow people that are not part of your silo. One of an exercise that I used to give to my students, now I gave it to them on Twitter, but I wouldn't send anybody to Twitter anymore, is to make a fake account and act as if you were somebody who was the opposite political persuasion than you are. And just do it for a couple of weeks and, follow, I'm assuming a lot of your people are not probably following Donald Trump or Elon Musk, but go make a fake account and follow those guys and start to see what the algorithm feeds you and what is the information that you see. So you can see what the other side is being fed. I mean, I think we have some idea of it, but it's something else to really spend some time in there and get a real sense of, oh, if I was fed this all day long, I understand why these people are seeing things that way. It's also interesting on LinkedIn right now, and I don't know how much time you spend on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn, what happened in the Oval Office last week, really some of the gloves came off on LinkedIn, and because people's buttons were really pushed by it. And so you're starting to see people are getting a glimpse into people on the other side of the aisle, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because we have to have a sense of what it is that we are, quote unquote, fighting against. Now, all of that said, right, I deal in cults, right?
Yeah.
And the book is called How Marketers Use the Same Tactics as Cults. And certainly we can say the administration that we're looking at right now, and certainly Elon Musk is a cult. I've written about it, but I'm not the only academic who has written that Elon Musk is a cult. And so we have to question ourselves, is why do people become part of cults, and how people get out of cults? The good news is that most people do get out of cults, and that what people think of as cults are things like Jim Jones or Charles Manson, and that's a limited understanding of what cults are. We have a broader definition of what that is. And in fact, in the 17th century, people simply thought of cults as a religious sect that venerated an ideology or a person. It then became something about no longer had religion attached to it. So we had like the cult of personality. And so we're moving to that idea. So yes, there are dangerous cults, but there are also cults that are a bit more benign. And so if we think about that in terms of the political situation that is going on right now, there are a lot of people who are suddenly going, wow, I bought the whole thing, and realizing that they have been part of a cult. And I know our initial instinct might be, you broke it, you buy it. And that's really not helpful. And I also understand that people have family members who've been very dangerous to them, who voted against their family members. I get all of this. And I'm not saying do this with everybody. And I'm not saying that if you are in a place where you can't do it, to do it. But I will offer to you that when somebody is part of a cult, they have given up everything around them. They've given up their family, their friends. They have bought into an ideology because they've had a very long period of indoctrination. Most people don't enter into a cult and say, oh, hi, cult, I want to come join you. No, it's a very long, very slow recruitment and retention process. And by the time somebody has gotten fully wrapped into the cult, they're at a point where they can't get out, because they've separated themselves from their family. They've isolated themselves in a silo where they only find information with people who agree with them. And so by the time they realize they've made a mistake, there is so much shame involved. Right. Because people might think about this in terms of someone who is involved in a multi-level marketing scheme, right? And so somebody, was selling Amway or selling Herbalife or any of those kinds of things. And all of a sudden they go, oh, what was I thinking? And they want to get out. But there's so much shame because they've asked everybody they know to buy these products from them. And then they have to go back to them and say, oh, you were right and I was wrong. And that's a really hard thing to do. It takes an awful lot of courage for someone to do that. So if there is someone, and I'm not saying everybody who's saying that they don't believe in this administration anymore are really truthful, you'll have a sense of whether or not the person really wants to be forgiving or to step away or wants, forgiveness for having not thought this through. And look, for a lot of people, unfortunately, they don't see it until it affects them personally. And that's a whole nother conversation that we could have about, what has happened to our compassion? What has happened to us being able to connect to people one-on-one? And that's what I think is also, maybe is the wake-up call, is to find the places where we can connect with people face-to-face, one-on-one, not connected to technology. And I'm not saying, look, I'm on technology, I'm on TikTok, I'm on, Threads and some other places, LinkedIn. But those aren't my friends. My friends are the people who will be there if, something happens to my daughter or my husband or my dog, right? They'll be the ones who are coming to see me, not the people that I know from TikTok.
Right. Yes. I think a lot of people think they can't become a part of a cult. Like they're immune to it because they're
Mm,
smart or they're educated. They don't
mhm.
realize that this marketing is surrounding us 24/7, is indoctrinating us 24/7. What can you say about a little bit about to people who don't think they're immune to being
Mm,
sucked into cults or marketing
yeah,
schemes or holding
yeah.
views?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot actually, and that's one of the things that make cults so pernicious is that people don't think they can be pulled in. But the first step in the recruiting process for a cult is to find people who are vulnerable. And we will all have times in our lives when we are vulnerable. And so, for instance, one of the prime recruiting times and places for cults is college campuses in the fall, because you have a large group of students who are away from their families, a lot of them for the first time. They don't have a community yet. They don't know people yet. And so they're looking for a place to fit in. And so then someone comes up to them and says, you know, can you answer a few questions? Or do you want to come have a free dinner? Or there's a free meditation class. And the next thing, you've gone to that and you get pulled into what the cult is doing. Because the steps in the process, right, after finding someone who's vulnerable, you lead them in through deception. And usually, you know, that is some kind of free class or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And what happens at that point is the creation of community. So it's really important. That's one of the things that social media has done. And it's also, you know, you want to talk about deceptive. This idea of calling it community, it's not really community. But what happens in a cult space is what they want to do is pull you into groups of people, because once you make a connection to another person, it's harder for you to extricate yourself because you've made a connection with someone else.
Right.
And the situation in terms of smart people has nothing to do with being smart. Some very, very, very smart people get pulled into cults. And part of the reason for that is that the cult leader, like the head of an MLM, tends to be power hungry and lazy. And so what they do is they try to find a group of people who will be underneath them, right? Just the way that an MLM is. Cults work exactly the same way. So they try to find a group of people that are just below them, that are celebrities, who are very good salespeople, who will do the work for them to recruit everyone else. There's another way to think about this as well. We talk in media about something called the third person effect. And the third person effect is the idea that media and marketing impacts everybody else, but I'm too smart for that.
Right.
That's not going to happen to me. And it's usually somebody who has a shirt or a hat or a pocketbook with a logo on it. So, you know, yes, you have been affected by it. Whether you want to admit it to yourself or not, it's probably true that you have.
Right. So would you say isolation or feeling isolated is one of the key factors of how easily people can get sucked in?
Mm,
And then
yes. Yeah.
using that isolation or anxiety, fear as a weapon against a person, giving them a lot of validation or a
Mhm.
sense of community. I had a old colleague and a friend who was a therapist, and she said the way she defined calls was giving a simple answer to a very complex problem.
Yes.
That's how
Yes.
she defined it. And I thought that
Yes.
was it was so descriptive of what goes on. People are looking for this answer. And when they're anxious, they're always looking for an answer. I need an
Right.
answer from something. So they'll be
Right.
scrolling, doom scrolling, right?
Right. 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 Well, Janja Lalich, who is a cult expert, people may know, she's in a lot of documentaries. She has a list of things that make up what a cult is. And I'm not a religion scholar. I'm taking this information from others and applying it to how marketing and social media spaces use it. But the two things that she really talks about a lot is the charismatic cult leader, right? So you have this leader at the top, but that leader then provides an all-encompassing worldview that answers all of life's questions.
Right.
So if we think about this in terms of something like MAGA, what happened there was that group particularly targeted disaffected baby boomers. So you're talking about a group of people, an older group of people, many of whom were very lonely. If you think back to the time of of COVID and pre-COVID, there was a big study that came out that there were older white baby boomers who were starting to commit suicide because they were so disaffected with their lives. And so that became a key target group for the MAGA movement, because this would be something that would give them something to grab onto. It would give their lives meaning in a way that nothing else had. And suddenly, what does that mean? What does Make America Great mean? I don't know, but you can feed into right? But you can feed into that whatever you think that that's going to be, that's going to answer the questions you need answered.
Right. It's almost like they're trying to feed into nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe when they were young, there were less problems, or the illusion that life was simpler,
Mm-hmm.
or that a lot of these difficult issues didn't exist, largely because as we age, we start to have more responsibility. But
Right.
it's almost like using that nostalgia as a way of getting into providing this simple solution for a problem that is very complex.
Right. Life doesn't have easy answers, and it would all be very nice if we could crawl back into the womb, but that's
Right.
that's really not an option. And look, I get it in terms of, I see it with my mother's generation. My mother's 95, and she's having to learn technology because she feels like if she doesn't, then she's left out of the loop. But it's not easy if you're used to writing everything and having, calendars and all of that kind of thing. But we can learn something from that generation too, because think about, our cell phone is supposed to be a phone. It's not supposed to be a place that has your calendar and your games playing on it and all of these other things. So I think, what I've been trying to recommend to people as I've been talking about the book, one, find places where you don't have to walk around with your phone. And I realize for some people, particularly for women, they don't feel comfortable not having their phone, particularly at night if they're walking around. And I'm not saying do that. But if you're walking your dog in the middle of the afternoon and you feel comfortable leaving your phone at home, do that. Find days and places where you can separate yourself from that. The other thing is take all the apps off your phone that you're not using. Try to strip it down to the bare minimum so that you're not tempted to constantly pick it up. And what I also say to people is, if you're not thinking about your phone as a 24/7 marketing research experiment and a mall, then you're not thinking about it the right way.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't remember or have never lived in a life where phones were just phones. Like my grandma used to have those dialing phones. There are people who've never had an experience where a phone was just to call somebody, to talk to someone, someone who's not reachable. But nowadays people are texting within the same house, right?
Right.
Like, you're upstairs, I'm downstairs. Hey, come over here. I need your help, right? Instead of actually going and having a in-person contact. And so it's very difficult for a lot of people, especially younger generation, to have a grasp of what is it like to not have all of that marketing happening constantly bombarding you 24/7. So how would you recommend that we as individuals, that we start to question the narratives that provoke fear, and instead learn to discern and seek messages that promote unity and critical thinking? Because it's very difficult, right? Because one thing to put everything away, but how do we start discerning what's the right person or the right message to follow?
Right. Some of it's a gut check, right? Some of it is when you are reading someone that you find yourself getting more and more anxious, take a breath and take a pause. The other thing is that, there used to be a time, going back to people who only had rotary phones, there was a time where you read the newspaper in the morning and you watched the news at night, and that was it. You don't need to know what's going on 24 hours a day. And because you can't affect it anyway, right? So that gets into the anxiety aspect of it. Click on links, right? If somebody makes a comment about this is the thing, is somebody posts an article and they make a comment on it, 9 times out of 10, people don't click on the link. Click on the link. Go read the article, go read it for yourself and find out whether or not you think that that's useful. There's websites, and I can't think of the name of it, and I'll give it to you, maybe you can put it in as a link, that provides you information about where different media outlets are on the spectrum, so that you can look. And look, newspapers have never been objective. That's something that comes out of journalism schools. It's not possible to be utterly objective. You can be more stringent in terms of your sources. And so something like the New York Times will look for 3 sources before it prints something. Breitbart is not doing that. So that's something to think about, but that's standard journalistic practice. You can also think in terms of, now you have to think in terms of, am I looking at the news part of the paper or the opinion part of the paper? So something like the Washington Post, the news part of it for now is okay. The opinion page is incredibly biased. The same thing is true with the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal news part of the paper is pretty good. I wouldn't touch the op-ed page with a 10-foot pole because it's obviously incredibly biased, because it's owned by Rupert Murdoch, who also owns Fox News, right? So you have to do a little research in terms of knowing who are the sources of your media. I also recommend tapping into resources from outside of the United States, the BBC, the Guardian. Those are also news outlets that do a very good job.
Would you say it's especially important for people to check their sources and do more of their think for yourself processes when they actually agree, when what they're reading or what they're watching is validating their perspective? Because I think that's where people wouldn't check. Oh, this validates what I think already. This makes me feel good. This is giving me relief from the doom scrolling. This is what I need to see. And oftentimes that's how people get sucked in even more, right?
Yeah.
So this is the thinking fast and slow piece that you were talking about, is that, okay, when you feel that immediate draw, you should double check that and go slower.
Yeah. I think people had a bit of a wake-up call after the election, where we saw the ratings for outlets like MSNBC just tank, because including me, I got sucked into by what they were saying, because I think we wanted to have hope. We wanted to believe, right?
Sure.
And so we all started believing, but that's also commentary. Right? Have to be thinking in terms of, are you looking at commentary? Because MSNBC is commentary as much as the Wall Street Journal op-ed page is, right? And it's different. There's a difference between watching news and watching commentary. And what I think is really interesting right now is some of the better news that's going on, and I wouldn't have said this 10 years ago, is your local news station. Because that's where news is happening.
Right.
That's where people are actually doing news, as opposed to, pundits spouting off. But to your point about, our confirmation bias, we also talk about this in media studies as uses and gratifications. We listen to the things that we want to hear, and we tend to push away those things that don't confirm the things that we already believe.
Yeah.
So it's a situation, particularly now. I mean, normally, maybe we didn't have to be so on guard in terms of what we are taking in, but we don't know who everybody is that we are watching. So, if you find somebody in the social media space and they sound interesting and they sound like they know what they're talking about and all of that, check to see who their followers are. See who their followers are, and if they allow it, and some people don't, who are they following? Because that will also give you information about whether or not this person may or may not be legit.
Yes, who you surround yourself with is who you really are.
Yes.
This is a bit of an odd question, because marketing essentially capitalizes on people's natural tendencies, the unconscious implicit biases. And because it's naturally capitalistic, it likes to optimize on the best way to make the most out of, which is very goal driven, right? So could
Mhm.
ethical marketing ever exist based on your experience? I'm sure you've seen a ton of things while you were
Mhm. Mhm.
exec.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we haven't seen a lot recently, but yes, I mean, yes, it can. When you want to think something like longer term, something that happened a while ago, seatbelts. Seatbelts didn't used to be in cars, and people
True.
didn't want to use seatbelts. There were advertising campaigns that taught people to use seatbelts, and now we wouldn't think twice to not use a seatbelt when we get into a car. The same thing was true with getting people to stop smoking. The Truth campaign was very effective. And I would love to see people do that now. There was a wonderful ad that they did where they took white bags, which looked like dead bodies, and piled them up in front of the offices of the tobacco companies. That's the kind of activism I would love to see right now against this administration. I'll
The
put a
problem
pin.
is that it doesn't make money, right? Because the main goal of marketing is to maximize profit.
Mhm.
So isn't it really difficult to have that in a
Well, if you
post?
want to look, at it in terms of a brand, now most brands will attach themselves to some kind of a cause, right? And the one company that does this incredibly well is Ben and Jerry's, and
Right, yeah.
it's because it is embedded into who they are. The founders were a couple of hippies, and they said, if we're going to continue, and they sold the company to Unilever, but they said to Unilever, we will only sell this company to you if we are allowed to continue to run this the way that we want to run it, which included, they made statements about Black Lives Matter. They've made statements about January 6th and so on. And if you go onto their page, there's a whole slew of things that they have done that shows their commitment and using marketing for good. Another example I would use is the cosmetic company Lush. If you go to their Instagram page, if you went to their Instagram page almost immediately after Frances Haugen came out and talked about what happened at Instagram and how Meta knew that how they were playing the algorithms on that social media space was creating eating disorders among teenagers. And Lush knows who their target audience is, and that's young women. They went onto the website and they said, be somewhere else.
Right.
Be somewhere else. And now if you go onto the site, it's all kinds of facts and figures about how Instagram is negatively impacting them, particularly young girls. And so they're using their voice in their space to say, no, we're not accepting this. And they still aren't there. 3-4 years later, they're still not there.
Yeah, consistency is key, right? Otherwise, activism for the desire for more profit becomes a problem. So would you say checking for consistency? The other tip that you had is look at who they're following. Anything else that people can look for to give attention to the right people if you're going to give attention to that industry or political figure or taking some kind of stance anyway?
Yeah. No, I think the point of looking for consistency. This is something I wrote about in an earlier book of mine called Compassion Inc. And it's all about cause marketing and corporate social responsibility and what companies are doing it right and what companies are doing it wrong. And one of the key aspects of this is to look for consistency is a big one, right? So if you look at something like MAC Cosmetics, they have the lipstick that they come out with every year. And key to why that works really well and why I give them kudos is all of the money, not all of the profits, all of the money from the sale of that lipstick goes to HIV and AIDS causes. So and if you want to look at that done wrong, you look at something like Bud Light a couple of years ago and what they did in terms of Dylan Mulvaney. If you're going to work with a particular community, whether it's the LGBTQ community or the Black community or whoever it is, you have to know when you put your foot into that space that you have to be ready to be there to support the people that you are using as the face for your product. You can't go in and walk away. And that's where brands make a big mistake.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Finally, for those feeling overwhelmed or fearful about the current political situation. It's been a whole mess and chaos since November, really, but January has been the start of where people start to feel very unsafe. What practical steps can we take to regain a sense of agency and perspective, both as citizens and as consumers?
Don't let anybody tell you a boycott doesn't work. They have worked for decades and decades and decades. Now, a one-day boycott, the one-day blackout, the boycott that happened a couple of days ago, that was a stress test. That wasn't meant to be able to say to somebody, "Oh, we're going to do a one-day, boycott of these companies, and it's going to have an ultimate impact on these companies." That wasn't the point. The point of that was to see who was going to jump on board. And I think that we saw that a lot of people did. And what you see in terms of the planning for that particular community is that it's going to target individual companies. That's when you're going to be able to see the real impact of doing those kinds of boycotts. We've already seen in terms of Target, the minute Target pulled away from its DEI, goes back to the question that you just asked, right? Are they consistent? No, they were so ready to pull away, and they've sort of been doing it in terms of pride over the last couple of years anyway. They really cared about it, they would stick with it, versus someone like Costco, that Costco said, yeah, we're doubling down on all of this stuff. But we've already seen Target's sales are going down. Tesla's sales are going down. People are going in front of Tesla showrooms, and they're protesting in front of Tesla showrooms. So the use of your pocketbook or keeping your pocketbook closed is very effective in terms of messaging. Well, I'll also say in terms of that, and goes back to what we were talking about in terms of cults and marketing methods and how they get us to engage. And that is your being on your phone is all about them getting advertising in front of you, which is all about getting you to spend money. That's the other reason to put your phone down. If you don't have it in front of you, you are less likely to have those messages in front of you that are going to get you to want to spend. Key part of this is what marketers talk about is the marketing funnel. And what happens in the marketing funnel is people become aware of a product. The product becomes part of their consideration set. They can go out and buy it, and then they tell their friends about it. In traditional spaces, there was breathing room within that. You saw a commercial on television, you had to get in your car, you had to go to the mall, or you had to walk downtown, you had to get to the store. You stood in front of the product and you thought, maybe I'll buy it, maybe I won't. But now in the online space, we've collapsed the funnel. So the point from awareness to purchase could happen instantaneously. Don't put yourself in spaces where you're going to be likely to have that happen, because you can make a real statement by not spending money places. So that's one part. The other part is to be aware of what is going on. One of the people that I'm telling a lot of people to follow, and I have a newsletter that I just put out, which is why I'm thinking about this. There's a woman by the name of Timnit Gebru. Her name is spelled Timnit, last name is Gebru. She was the head of, co-head of ethics in AI for Google. And she was fired in 2020 for speaking up against what she thought to be unethical behavior in the company. And since she's left, she has been an incredibly powerful voice for what is going on in Silicon Valley, and specifically AI, and what people can do to protect themselves and be aware of what's going on in that space. I highly recommend that people follow her. She's everywhere. You can find her on LinkedIn and Blue Sky and a lot of other places. Another way that people can protect themselves, and something that people need to be aware of, which they may not be, is that influencers are supposed to note whether they have been sponsored. Now, not all of them do, but they should. Unlike them, political people who have been paid do not have to say they have been paid for what they're saying, which is then behooves us even more to pay attention when people are talking about politics, because they may have been paid to say what they're saying.
That's an excellent point. I think a lot of times we don't think about that at all. We see celebrity endorsements, we see influencers talking about, and there's always people talking about in comment section, right? Oh, you're
Mhm.
probably paid or whatnot, but there's not really an attention, a lot of attention drawn to that
Right,
topic.
right,
It's more
right.
speculation. So coming from you, from an area of expertise, that's very helpful for people to remember when
Mhm.
somebody that you trust is talking about supporting somebody that they could have been paid. That's
Right.
always a potential.
Yep, for sure.
Ultimately, what I'm getting is that intellectualism is the way to fight back against the anxiety and the fear mongering agenda to get us to behave a certain way, which is a part
Yeah.
of a greater strategic plan by the few that are controlling the whole rhetoric.
It's get out of your emotions and get back into your head. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be, but I'm afraid about the word intellectualism because I think people hear that and they're going, "Oh no, I don't want homework." But look, it's the reason why I'm on TikTok. I know that, I would love everybody to go out and buy my book, or if they can't buy my book, tell their library to get it. But I know that there's going to be a lot of people who aren't going to be able to do that or don't want to do that. But I still want to be able to share that information with people, which is why I choose to be on a platform like that, because I then am able to reach people who wouldn't necessarily see it in a book, but are willing to listen to a 2-minute video.
Yes, that's why I'm going to tag you in all the videos that I'm going to be sharing from this interview. I want to recommend everyone to read Hoodwinked, please. And actually, the other documentary that you were in, By Now, that's on Netflix.
Correct.
That one also talks about whistleblowers and someone who used to work for Amazon, right?
Correct.
So that's another one that people can, if they want to watch something, because maybe that's their baby step into all of this, then that's another recommended documentary where you're featured.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your profound, abundant knowledge in this area and what people can really benefit from. Because I think people often don't think of politics, marketing, and cults as one, and how they all intersect and connect. This was an excellent conversation. Thank you for being part of the solution in a world where profit is the primary desire for many who are at the top because they got there as they seek power. Yeah. So this interview itself is part of the resistance. I really want to thank you so much for giving us the time and sharing your knowledge.
Oh, thank you so much. It truly has been my pleasure.